So at this point, we've gone through and done the UV wrapping videos, right? And we'll definitely see some review UV wrapping lecture coming up, right? I'm kind of probably going to wind down some of the modeling review lecture just because we're getting at that point where 2 weeks left, there's videos, lab time. But we started exploring actually how to do material stuff, right? And so today's going to be more of like an introduction to some basics. We'll still do a little more work on this. And then as we go to work on some of our other things, it'll be easier because it'll be a lot of the same stuff. So it's like UV wrapping, right? A lot of the same things. All right. So at this point, yeah, it's still recording, right? Yeah, okay. So at this point, I really just want to explore starting to paint an actual color map. Now, we've actually already explored a little bit how to create a texture here, right? And how we can create that UV grid for us, right? Now, one of the things that we can do is, you'll notice, there is an actual shading workspace here, right? UV editing, but then there's shading. In the shading workspace, you'll actually see on our object, right, that we've got a couple of different objects with a couple of their own materials and that UV grid texture, right? So if you go to the shading workspace, you'll see the viewport here, and you'll see the actual shader network, right, as we call it. And you'll see that that's actually that material stuff we were looking at, right? If you click on the red ball here, that right there is this right here. But you'll see that there's actually that texture plugged in, right? So see how there's kind of something plugged into the base color? That's what that is right here, right? So if I just left-click drag on this, I can move it, and you see how it's actually plugged into the base color. So one of the easy ways to kind of just delete these things is just to grab on this and delete. And that will actually get rid of your UV grid, right? Now, if you want to change the name of the material so that you can actually have different materials on everything, what you could do is either go here and change that material name, or here, right? Because right now there's kind of only basically that default material and everything, right? So I can easily just kind of come in here, delete that, and say, hey, let's call that tabletop, right? So it's actually quite easy to change the name of a material as so. And of course, I'll show you how to create a new material so that you can have different materials in each object, right? But a little bit about that, right? So today's, more than anything, is going to be kind of introduction to UV wrapping stuff, right? So, all right. So just kind of a little bit about that, right? How you can get rid of that UV grid, right? I usually make sure the use nodes is checked on, although it's usually checked on by default right there. But there's a shading workspace where you can see kind of a little bit more of the inner workings of your materials and kind of the network that can create them, right? So just a little about that. But of course, the red ball right here towards the bottom, you can rename your material there. Technically, you can kind of click on the X to get rid of the material there as well. But it never hurts to see a little bit of how the shading workspace works, right? Now in this case, I'm going to go to the texture paint workspace, right? Because we do have multiple workspaces up here, right? UV editing, where we did UV wrapping, shading, where we got to see this. And then of course there is texture paint, which actually looks a lot like UV editing. The reason for that is because you can actually do 2D painting if you need to, right? You could do 2D painting in here if you need to, and sometimes you want to. A lot of the time, 3D projection painting is the better option. 3D projection painting, it's kind of like an actual projector, right? How it projects light from the actual, well, it's a light, really. It's a complicated light that's projecting an image. And it projects it on a surface, right? Projection painting works a lot like that, right? Your camera is the projector, and your brush is kind of where it's going to project, right? And so you just kind of move right across there, and it paints whatever color or whatever image is on your brush on the model from that view. And the benefit of this is, one, you get to paint all stuff in real time on the model and see exactly what it looks like on the model. Two, we know we have seams, right? We've been marking seams and unfolding based on those. 3D projection can paint over seams quite well, right? So 3D projection painting is awesome. It's a powerful way to do a lot of your texturing. There is procedural texturing, which we're not really going to see on this project. You can do 2D painting. We're really probably not going to see on this project either, right? This is our first project. We're going to do a bit more of an advanced one with our spaceship, right? So just kind of a little bit about that. I don't really need my 2D viewport right now, so I'm just going to kind of put my cursor over, right, that little bar in the center. Just kind of drag that over so it's a bit smaller. The nice thing, though, is a lot of what we're going to see here is like our UV wrapping. It's going to be the same stuff basically again and again and again. So there's actually a lot of natural repetition built in to the mechanics of these things. Now, in this case, I could turn off the other objects in my outliner up here, right? So I'll just turn off the table braces, the table legs, just so I don't see those. We could see that if we go down to our red ball down here, our tabletop materials there. But I need to create a new base color, right? Because we got rid of that UV grid one. So once again, I could click on that base color yellow dot, right? Remember, red ball is part of our property editors down here. I did rename that default material. We'll create a new material on one of the other parts momentarily. But there is that base color right here, yellow dot, right? Base color section, yellow dot, click on it. It brings this up. And of course, we can go to image texture again. So this is actually just like our UV grid stuff, right? So it's the same process. We're already kind of familiar with this. Image texture. In this case, new, because I do want to create a new one, right? So remember, it brings these up, new. I'm going to call this tabletop color, right? Very top, there's an ability to give it a name, tabletop. I do want to make my resolution a bit higher for this, right? It depends on how much your device can handle, right? If you really want to go 1024, that's okay. The more pixels you have, though, the nicer it'll look, the more resolution it has, right? It does depend on how much your device can handle, though, to a certain extent. I'm going to go 2048. So you should usually double the numbers, right? So 1024, 2048 is twice that. If you want to go even bigger, 4096. These scale well for real-time performance and rendering, so you'll actually see this kind of usually as your preset texture resolutions. So I'm going to do 2048 by 2048. Now in this case, I can leave blank, right? I can leave blank. We just want it to create a blank image, right? If I want, I can go up here and I can pick a color. So I'll kind of click on color, and I'll click on the bar here in the gray area. I'm kind of feeling like maybe kind of a slight brownish color, right? Hit OK. And there you go. You can actually see that there is kind of a created image on there. Now, one of the things you do want to be aware of is that once it's created, in the UV editor, you'll see there is, I want to make sure you give it enough space, an area called image. It's right below window, image. If I click on that, you should usually see your saved stuff in there. Why am I not seeing it? Probably because I haven't really done anything painting on it. Usually it takes a minute, right? So if I go in here and I maybe start to paint a little bit on here, you'll notice once I start to paint a little color on, the tabletop image shows up. Where is that showing? Why is that not showing up? That's right. Make sure it's on here as well, right? I'm so used to bPainter. I've got a great add-on for Blender. But you have to kind of go to the little triangle dot image right here next to tabletop. If you click on that, you'll actually see the tabletop image right there. Select it. That becomes active. Then you'll see image has an asterisk next to it. And you go in there and you see how you can actually save or save as. And this will give us the ability to kind of save it on the desktop, whatever folder we want to. Just call it tabletop PNG. I'll probably call it color though, right? Color. There we go. Save as image. All right. And that's been saved. Now, keep in mind that you can also go to the File menu, External Data, Automatically Pack Resources, right? File, External Data, check on Automatically Pack Resources. What this will do is it'll actually save the texture in the Blender file, right? So that's really, really cool that you can actually do that in Blender. But these are a couple of things that you do need to kind of set up, right? You'll also notice that we go from material up to the wrench screwdriver up here. And once we've kind of saved that image and make sure it's kind of selected here, start to paint, you should see kind of the tabletop color here. And if you have multiple layers on this, or not multiple layers, but multiple images plugged into different material channels, material properties, right? You actually see those available here. This is something they're working on for this year to improve default layer systems in Blender, because the actual texture painting tools in Blender are quite nice, but they don't have a really good stock layer system at all right now. That's one of the reasons why I have the B Painter add-on, but they're actually working on that this year for the Blender 3.0 series. So I'm looking forward to seeing that come to fruition. All right, but you'll see that we have color here, and you'll notice that in the texture paint window here, particularly once you've done that, you'll have to kind of go here and periodically save your image. There's a quick key for it, Alt-S, though, kind of a variation on Control-S. But you'll see right here in the texture paint major workspace, you have the brush strength. That's kind of its opacity. You have a lot of brush controls here, and we'll see more of these a little bit today. And you have your paintbrush right there, which is usually our good default. You do have a clone feature, a fill feature. There's some cool masking features. We'll see more of those as we go along. But you do have some kind of major brushes right here, and then lots of things you could do with those brushes, right? But our primary one is usually going to be this one. Brush size, radius, right here. Although left and right bracket will actually jump the units in sizes of 10, right? Although S technically will allow you to adjust size as well. But also it's just a control right here, radius. You can, of course, pick a color, right? So there's a color picker right here. Although this stuff's all right here as well if you go to the wrench screwdriver at the very top, right? So you have a couple ways to get to it. If I wanted, I could pick like a, kind of a different color. And you notice if I just hold down the left mouse button and move my cursor, it paints right on the model. So that's actually painting color. It even can go right over the seams like they're not there. It can project weird at angles though, right? Because it's projecting from the camera, and so polygons that face away from the camera, it doesn't paint on as well. So you do have to kind of adjust your viewport as you paint. And you'll see it's updating in the image. Because remember, this texture is actually a PNG. It's a two-dimensional picture. We just happen to be painting right on the 3D model into this viewport here, right? Of course, if I want to, I could actually fill this all in with that brown again, right? So I can just click on that fill bucket. If I go to color here, right, you'll see there is a color picker. And I can always sample that color that I want. And that fill bucket will allow us to just click and refill everything, right? And you can fill it in the UV viewport, right? So if you want the image to all kind of be that brown, there we go. You can click on the model. You can use masks. There's some cool stuff with it. But there's a fill bucket. At this point, I really just wanted to get you guys to see kind of that basic feature there, right? Now, I actually do want to kind of show you that mask, because this will make it easier to maybe do some texturing on the tabletop here. Although, I really feel like I should probably get some texture here first. Now, this is where it's going to be a little trickier for you guys. You guys aren't having access to these textures yet. So this is where you can go to, say, like Google. Beware of watermarks, though, and copyrights on textures. You can create a free account on textures.com, right? That does come with limitations, though, in terms of you get the lowest resolution textures, and you only have like 15 tokens a day, which basically gets you 15 textures a day. But that will give you a way to start building up your own texture library, right? So today's video is really much more about introducing you guys to some basics, and then we'll kind of build on that, because it's going to be a lot of the same stuff again and again for the rest of our models. So this kind of gets us that starting point. You should build up your own texture library. I've got a few already saved. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my regular brush is on. I'm going to go back to color and set it to white. Right? Just kind of make sure it's white or close enough to white anyways. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to texture view here, right? So you see how there's texture? Now, usually if you create a new texture from here, it won't let you open it per se, or you have to go somewhere else anyways. But you can go to the texture menu here and change your mapping type to something called stencil, right? There's a couple of options here. My favorites are view plane and stencil. But we'll go to stencil. So you go to the texturing little menu here, right? There's a section called mapping. It's right below the new button. You can click on that pull down. Stencil, it's the bottom of those. Now, I need to have an image that I want to paint as a stencil, right? So the very, very bottom of our properties editor is that red checkerboard. I'm going to click on that. There's a new button, right? New. So I'm going to click on new. This brings this up here, and you see there's open. In this case, I actually want to get textures from outside of Blender to be basically my brushes, right? The images I'm going to paint with, right? Obviously, you can paint just color like I was showing you a few minutes ago, but you can paint with images as well. So I'm going to go to open. And this is something that will probably be streamlined in future versions of Blender as they work on texturing. And if you're willing to spend $40 on the BPainter add-on, which is an awesome add-on, that also gives you a neat layer and brush image-based workflow. It doesn't actually replace the core features up here, though, which are strong in Blender. It just gives kind of some robustness to some other features. And you'll notice that I do kind of have some stencils here that I've downloaded. If you're going to view them through here, it's probably a good idea to kind of turn on the thumbnails, right? So the last of these is thumbnails. And that way you can actually see these images. And you can see I've got some kind of wood stuff. So I can grab like a little bit of wood texture here. Open image. And now you'll see there's wood loaded in, right? And you'll also notice if I go to texture up here, it's there. You can actually click on this to browse your different stencils, right? So once I'm out of here, you'll see that there is this, right? And one of the things you'll notice is right mouse button will rotate. I assigned these different quickies at home because I like more of like a Mudbox workflow for that. But if you hold down right mouse button, you'll notice you can grab this image, right? It's loaded this wood in, right? So as long as you go here, open, find that wood, it should turn on here. We've got stencil turned on as our mapping type, so it's all through there. Right mouse button moves the stencil, right? Control right mouse button rotates the stencil. I'm trying to remember how, I think it's Alt-Shift or Control-Shift. Which one is it? I'm trying to remember. Okay, there we go. Right? So right mouse button rotates it, or moves it. Control right mouse button rotates it. Shift right mouse button scales it, right? I always have to remind myself. I know them, but I have to remind them about it because I assigned them different shortcut keys because I like a different workflow for it, right? But one of the things you'll notice is your Alt right mouse button for zoom won't work with its default functions. So that's when you probably would use your scroll wheel to zoom a little bit, when you're just when you're painting with the stencil. So right mouse button moves it, control right mouse button rotates it, shift right mouse button scales it. It works best if you rotate or scale from the corners, right? You can actually even stretch these. We're not going to do that or need that now, but you can actually stretch those. So right mouse button moves, control right mouse button rotates, shift right mouse button scales. And what you could do is you could just left click drag to paint this wood on here, right? So you see we could actually go in here and just start to paint this wood texture. You see, I have to kind of make sure to get it in good positions from different views. But you'll notice that you can paint with an image. So this is going to give you some cool functionality for how to paint and adjust stuff. Right? Remember, right mouse button moves the image. Control right mouse button rotates. And you see that I can go around here and just paint kind of a wood on here. Now you notice it's doing a pretty good job of painting right over the seams, right? Particularly if you get a good view, it acts like the seam's not there. It's letting you see exactly how it's going to look and allow you to paint exactly where you want to on the model. And you see how it's actually showing up in the 2D image here. So you see that this is actually a big part of our texturing. In fact, pretty much all the rest of the texturing we're going to be doing for the next couple of weeks is going to be primarily this. We'll kind of show a couple of different material types off. We're probably just going to skip bump mapping or only do it lightly on some stuff. This probably would probably be like more of a polished wood anyways, or some kind of lacquered wood. But the idea is that you can go in here and you can paint this stuff, right? That you can actually use images to paint on the model. And we see that one of the cool ways to do it is your stencil. And if you overpaint a little bit like there, just kind of come back in and paint a little more. I like to change my fall off to from custom to smoother. It'll actually have a smoother fall off on the edge. Tends to blend a little bit better because it's got a soft edge to the brush. But slowly and surely we can go in here and paint this. Now, I don't want to have this take forever, so I think that'll be good enough for, at least for this moment, right, for that. But you just kind of keep doing it, right? You kind of keep painting. Now, one of the things that you can actually do is you could, of course, load a new image in, right? So I could actually click right back on this. We can see that there's our image. One of the things we could do is, you see right up here, there is kind of that, it's like, right, that's that red checkerboard at the very bottom. And this is going to be a lot of new stuff, probably a longer video just because I want to lay the foundation down, but we're going to keep basically doing most of this same stuff on our other textures stuff. It's like our UV and wrapping, right? That first one is the hard one because it's new, and we're learning some new mechanisms, but you're going to see me redoing these a bunch. So there's already going to be a lot of natural reteaching built into the next couple of lectures we're going to do for texture painting. So if you see right here, kind of at the very top of the red checkerboard here, texture, there's kind of one that looks like 2 pages right next to the X. That's new texture. I can click on that, and you'll see that there's a second one in here now, right? So you have 2. And what you should be able to do is go in here and try to remember where the grab that images. What's going here? Blah, 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 blah. I'm just so used to why am I not seeing all that stuff? Should see more options here. All right. Let's turn that off there as well. There we go. All right. So sometimes you just want to go up here. I'm just so used to BPainter, right? Making this stuff a little simpler. Texture. If you actually go to texture, there's a little X, and that'll allow you to, it doesn't get rid of the image, but it turns it off, right? And that will allow me to come back in here, and I'll just do new again. That's okay if there's a texture too. And you see how I can open again, right? So I can open, and I can go find that stencils folder again, and I can find a different texture, like maybe that one. And then I can open image, and then we'll have another image loaded in here, right? And now if I go to texture, you'll see that there are that extra wood image, right? Didn't really need that one. I'll just get rid of that. Although I found sometimes it doesn't get rid of it. But the other one's in there now, right? So you see how you can actually, in the texture viewport up here, you can go into texture menu. You can go right there, and you'll see that this is, man, I'm so spoiled by BPainter, I'll tell you that. You'll see that you can switch between all your different textures you loaded in. You do have to load them in, though, right? This is the process here. You do have to load them in. Fortunately, we're not going to be doing tons of textures, so it's not going to be too much of a hassle, but when you have a texture library of a few hundred or a couple, like 1,000 plus, like I do, you'll appreciate BPainter and a proper browser of texture files, right? That's kind of one of the weak points of stock Blender right now. It's actually got nice brush painting, actual painting tools, but the image management kind of layer system leaves some work, right? That's reasonably easy enough to work with, but there's better, right? So once that's loaded in, we have a different image here that we can paint with. Now, in this case, I might want to make it a little easier and not have to worry about kind of painting here. So one of the things you could do is actually go to 3 for face mode, right? Good old 3 for face mode. And I could select these 2 faces, right? So you just select the faces you want. 8 is the quick key for texture paint, right? Right up here, if you go to the texture paint menu, it's right up here, right? It's kind of where our object edit mode's at, right? At the bottom is texture paint. It's got its own quick key, 8. Now, you'll notice right up here, right next to texture paint and view, there's what looks like a white square and kind of a gray square behind it. If I click on that, that's called masking. And what that'll do is it'll only let you paint on the non-grayed out area. So now you see when I go in here and paint, you see how it won't actually let me paint anywhere else? So Blender has actually got some really cool polygonal masking features. If you were to actually hide polygons and turn that on, it'll hide them in the viewport. It even works for fill bucket, right? So you can actually select polygons, turn that masking on right there, and then you could use your fill bucket to just fill a color there. That's actually really well done in Blender. I really like their polygon masking features. Remember, right mouse button moves the image. Control right mouse button will rotate it. Shift right mouse button will zoom it. You will have to use scroll wheel for zoom when you're in stencil mode in Blender by default, unless you change the quick keys. But you'll see that you can actually paint with images by using mapping stencil type. You just have to make sure to load textures in through the red checkerboard down here and tell which texture you want to paint with right through here at the top. To turn them off, making it easier to browse another image, you can just click on that X, and you see how it's gone from here? It's not gone though, right? See how there's that white checkerboard there? It's still here, right? It's just how you could turn that off. And of course, we could turn masking off. And now we can see, I'll go to image here. You can see how there's an asterisk, save. And then of course, I could save my scene. And remember, I have that external data automatically pack resources in there, so it'll actually pack that in there. And now we have our first introduction to texture painting with images, right? This is going to be a lot of what we're going to be doing for the rest of this. So this might have been a lot for today, but basically, much like the UV wrapping, it's going to be the same, mostly the same stuff for the next couple of video lectures, right? We're going to use stencils. We're going to create materials, plug our texture maps in there. So you're going to actually get plenty of practice with this stuff over the next week and a half. All right, let me stop recording, and that'll be a great